مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومواله. In today's discussion, in today's talk about the meanings of the verses that we've read, I wish to just focus upon a few verses, and that is firstly verse number 11 and 12. In these verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to us, teaches us what will happen to the wealth, to the money of a person who passes away, who leaves this world. So I put the title here, who is given our money and property after we pass away, according to the teachings of the Qur'an and Sunnah. So when a person's died, what will happen to his money? What will we do with his money? So in these verses, and the final verse of Surah An-Nisa, which inshallah we shall be reciting tomorrow, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned the people who are deserving of the money, meaning the people who have to be given the wealth and the property of a person who's passed away from his family. But first of all, we need to understand that when a person passes away, there are 4 things that have to be done with the wealth. So there's 4 steps that are taken with the money. First of all, the money can be used for arranging for the person to be given a bath after they passed away, and for the clothing, what we call the kafan, and for the grave, right, for the burial. So this is the first step. Now, if the family members decide we're not going to use the money of the person who passed away, and instead we're going to use our own money, or if the community, the people around, have a system where they pay themselves, or there's a membership based upon which they have committees who pay for this, then that's fine. But if you don't have that, then you can use the money of the person who passed away. Now, if a person passed away without any money, this would not mean that we don't arrange for their bathing and their putting on the clothes, the kafan, and giving them a grave. If they have no money, then it becomes necessary upon us all, becomes important for us all as a community to arrange for that. The second step after this is that if the person has any debts, meaning if the person owes somebody else money, then that money has to be given after the funeral arrangements, etc. So meaning that after the first step, the next step is any debts that the person owes. And the third then is that 1/3 of the wealth, 1/3. So if I was to, for example, ask you what is 1/3 of 9, right? Alhamdulillah, I think one of our youngest students, the youngest student of our classes, is Haq, is here, who's quite good at maths, right? So he'll be smiling at this question. So what is 9 divided by 3, right? 1/3 of the wealth, right? So 9 divided by 3 is 3, even with my bad maths, right? I hope I'm not wrong, right? But, so if a person has £9, right? So, and he said, give my money to the masjid when I pass away, or when I pass away, give my money to a charity, then we won't give all of their money to the charity. We can only give 1/3. Now, what we're talking about here is we're talking about Islamically, right? Obviously, in this country, the law is such that if a person wrote that give all my money to the masjid, then the law would allow that. But as Muslims, in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if a person wrote something like this, knowing that it's not going to go to his family members, on the day of judgment, he will be punished for this, right? So in his life, he can give a gift to whoever he wants. But when he's passed away, then Islam teaches how the money will go. And that's why, alhamdulillah, many people have started to make Islamic wills so that their wealth is given according to Islamic teachings. Otherwise, even if you don't make a will, but it's important for people to understand this. So a third of the wealth left after paying all of the debts will go towards any cause. So cause, for example, we said masjid or charity or person. Now this person cannot be the closest family members who are going to be mentioned later on. Right? We're going to look at the verse again and look at which family members are mentioned in the verse. So for example, amongst those family members who will definitely get your money is your son. Now, if you have 6 sons, all of them are going to get money. You cannot now make a will saying 1/3 of my wealth should go to my favorite putter, if you like, right? My favorite child. You can't give to him extra. But this person, for example, could be, oh, my cousin is really poor and I want to give him money. Now, because the cousin doesn't automatically come under these people who will get the wealth, it could go to the cousin. Or for example, if you say that I want this wealth to go to such and such a scholar, or such and such a pious person, or such and such a poor person. In the same way, a trust is similar to a cause, right? So for example, you say, I want it to go to such and such a trust or charity, right? You hear a lot about people passing away, especially the non-Muslims, and saying all of my wealth will go to such and such an animal's charity or whatever else, right? And often it's like millions of pounds going towards that. But in Islam, Islamically, only 1/3 of the wealth would go towards any charity. Then after you've given what he wanted or she wanted, for example, they wanted it to go to the masjid or towards building a well or whatever else, then after the above 3 steps have been taken, the money and other wealth left has to be given to these people mentioned within the Quran and Sunnah. Has to be is a key word, right? You can't just take this lightly in accordance with the shares specified in the verses. So I've marked in capitals, the hadith states that the knowledge of inheritance, knowing how to share out the money and other wealth after a person has passed away, is half of all knowledge. Meaning knowing this is half of knowledge, nisful ilm. And it is also stated that it is the first knowledge that will be raised, meaning taken away. Meaning people won't know this knowledge, right? And people will not bother learning it, will not bother acting upon it. Now, how many people's family members will pass away and they will not learn what is the way, according to Islam, to give out this money that's left over? That's why I'm focusing a lot on this, because this is another thing that is very much not known in our society and is necessary for us to know. There's a lot of detail needed about this, so it's not an easy science to know, although learning the basics is important, but this is something that has many different scenarios, right? So those who studied law in, for example, law in the universities, the law of the land, even they, if they came across inheritance or wills and administration, like then they will also find that there's many different scenarios even in any other legal system. So in the same way in Islam, this can sometimes be very technical. So you would have to consult a mufti to confirm what is the way that we're going to distribute. But knowing the basics is important, and that's why such courses should be developed that teach people the basics about this. But in Dars Nizami, which is the traditional courses, there's a specific book that's taught called Siraji, and there's a specific topic. Now we have to remember that distributing the shares to the people mentioned in the verses is not a choice, it is necessary. They cannot be forced to give up their right. If they happily do this from their own accord, then that's fine. So if they say themselves, right, so you have 6 sons and one son says, I have a lot of money, I don't want this money, I want it to be passed on to others, then because he's forgiven it, it's fine. But if we put a gun on his head or we pressurize him to forgive, then this is not allowed. And I mentioned sons, but unfortunately it happens more to the daughters. It happens more to the sisters, right? And that is even worse. It cannot happen that our culture is we don't give to our sisters. Our culture is that we don't give to our mothers. That's no excuse. Rather, in Islam, you have to offer it, you have to give it to the sister or to the mother or to whoever from the females has right, the wife. If she then says herself that I don't want it, that's different. But you can't force her. And it shouldn't be a culture that we expect her to forgive, because this is her right. This is what the Quran is giving her a right to do so. Now, if you look at the beauty of Islam, a woman could own things from the beginning of Islam. You know, in Surah An-Nisa, there's so many different topics, including marriage as well. Right at the time of marriage, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, give the woman her dowry, make her the owner of that. So the woman has right to own things. In the Western world, for example, in England, it's only in the past few hundred years that a woman could own a property. Before that, she was not even allowed to own a property. In Islam, she was given this right from the beginning. So we're going to look at those, the verses, inshallah, to understand. Can you see the board, Brother Imran? Can you see this screen, Brother Imran? Can you just see the board at the moment?
Just the Word document.
Right, sorry, I'll just have to stop share. So this is the verse itself, the long verse, right? Yusikumullahu fi awladikum. So the first people that I mentioned are the children. I'm just going to mention to you who is mentioned from the family members. If I go through what are the amounts and how they change, that'll take a long time. So the children. Then after the children, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the parents, wali abawayhi, the parents, right? And then after the parents, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions specifically the mother, how much she would get, right? If the person has children and his parents he does not have children and only his parents are left, then the mother will get 1/3, right? And the rest will go to his father. If I'm just mentioning that share because why is the mother mentioned separately to the father? And in that situation, when a person doesn't have children, if they do have brothers, then the mother's share will change as well, right? Then you have, the Quran is mentioning Aba'ukum wa abna'ukum, your fathers and your sons. La tadruna ayyuhum aqrabu lakum nafa'a. You do not know which of them will be more useful to you. This is not just about this. This is about always in our life. We think our children and our parents is two very beloved things to us, and we will be often clashing between them. Which ones should we give more right to? But the Quran is announcing that your parents have, your mother especially, has more right than anybody else, even more than your children. So aba'ukum wa abna'ukum la tadruna ayyuhum aqrabu lakum naf'a. Sorry, I zoomed it out a bit there, but I'm sure you can still see it. Then after that, I mentioned the wives, right? And how, sorry, yourselves, if your wives pass away, how much you would get as husbands. And then is mentioned what the wives would get if you pass away, right? وَلَهُنَّ الرُّبُعُ مِمَّا تَرَكْتُمْ. And it changes depending on if you have children or not. Now, if a person passes away whose parents have already passed away and they don't have anybody else, they don't have any children, right? And they're not married, then how will their wealth be distributed? That's mentioned here as well. So these are all the different scenarios that I mentioned. These are the people that I mentioned here. And then you realize that these are the people who you cannot make a will for, because these people, the Quran has already taught us and specified how much they'll be given. There's a lot more detail about this, but I just want to give you an example of how this verse is mentioning the important factors of this and how it's important to understand that this is a right that people have to be given. Now, when we mention the children, you have to realize that it's not just the sons there, but it's the daughters as well. And in the verse has mentioned how much the sons will be given and how much the daughters will be given. As a conclusion, just the other verse I wanted to point you towards was the last verse of the 4th juz, meaning the last verse of the 4th para, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions those people who you cannot marry because they're your closest family members. When you look at that, you also realize that for these people, you are a mahram, meaning mahram means that if you are traveling, for example, then it will be permissible for you to accompany them, women, when they're traveling, right? In Islam, it's not just for Hajj, but it's always, if a woman is traveling beyond 57.5 miles on a long journey, then she should have a male guardian, a male with her who will protect her and look after her. And that male has to be one of the close relatives, and those relatives are mentioned in that verse. So I'll just open up that verse and then inshallah we're concluding our session today, inshallah. So حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ أُمَّهَاتُكُمْ. So your mothers, your daughters, your sisters, your aunties, your puppo, your khalas, meaning your maternal aunts, the daughters of your brother, meaning your nieces. And in the same way, nieces covers the sisters' daughters as well. And the foster mothers, meaning the mothers who gave you milk, right, breastfed you, and your sisters from that foster relationship, and the mother-in-laws, the ummahatu nisaikum, and those daughters who are not your daughters, the daughters of your wives, right? Those are also haram upon you, and meaning that you're mahram for them, you're not allowed to marry them, and in the same way, you are not, you are able to be their mahram, right? And some of these are such that Islam still encourages that you keep a distance. For example, daughter-in-laws and mother-in-laws, Islam still teaches that there should be a bit of a distance. But others, they are very close relationships. And وَحَلَائِلُ أَبْنَائِكُمُ الَّذِينَ مِنْ أَصْلَابِكُمْ. And in the same way, that refers to the wives of your own sons, right? Your daughter-in-laws. And to gather between two sisters, إِلَّا مَا قَدْ سَلَفَ. So if you have more than one wife, then having two sisters is not allowed at one time. And then the next verse, the first verse of the 5th para, mentions that you are obviously not allowed to marry a woman who's already in a marriage. And unfortunately, that takes to the topic that we're discussing, I think, in the 2nd session about talaq, right? So unless a woman is free from the first marriage, she cannot marry again. So it's important that that's also considered. So these were the 2 verses that we wanted to focus upon a bit more today. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us for any errors, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enlighten our hearts with the understanding of the Holy Qur'an.